Hi, everyone. Thank you for that intro. It's great to be here virtually, and I hope to spend the next 15 minutes or so going over some brand new consumer AR survey data and strategic takeaways. So no one else has seen this publicly yet except for Artillery Pro subscribers and clients, and this is otherwise the first public release of this data, so you're all the first people to see it. So before going into that, a quick bit about me for context. I'm a 15-year tech industry analyst, most of that time covering mobile through the course of the smartphone era, but the last 4 years shifting to cover AR and VR exclusively, including founding Artillery Intelligence. So Artillery Intelligence, for those unfamiliar, is a market research and analyst firm for spatial computing, and it's built on the best practices of trend analysis and market sizing and all of the things that typical analysts do and refine throughout their careers. And it takes form in lots of narrative reports and data deliverables and market forecasts and consumer survey data, as we're going over today. And it's all packaged up and housed in Artillery Pro. We also have a sister publication called AR Insider, which I know some of you read, and we appreciate that. So one of the things we do twice a year on that list of deliverables is original consumer forecasts, and one for VR and one for AR. And this consists of survey data and slides themselves and a narrative report we put out that walks through all the findings and the strategic takeaways. So today we're essentially going through a sampling of that report just to give you an idea of what's in store here. And the survey itself, as like background, is done in tandem with consumer survey specialist Thrive Analytics. So we write the survey questions and the report, and they do what they do best, which is to field the survey to a diverse and demographically representative sample of more than 1,000 US adults. And we're now in the third wave of the research, which means there's some interesting trending that's starting to come to light. So to tackle all that, we're going to divide the analysis, into users and non-users, which obviously have some differing sentiments. And I should define here also, for context before we jump into it, that this survey focused on just mobile AR as opposed to smart glasses, which don't have enough consumer penetration yet to provide meaningful survey results, but it's absolutely on our roadmap, and we look forward to getting there. So to start with mobile AR users, what do they look like? As I mentioned earlier, they're a diverse and population representative sample with pretty even distribution across age, gender, and income levels. And I won't go into too much detail here on this slide because we only have about 15 minutes, but this is a quick snapshot of the user base. Now, the survey also indicates that users of mobile AR total almost 85 million in the US today. And this is total mobile AR users, so anyone who's tried it, not necessarily frequent active users, which is a delineation we'll get into in just a bit. But this is growing at a pretty healthy rate over the past few waves of this research and is up to about 26% of the US population. Now, one of our first delineations is, how does that user base break down by formats for mobile AR? And the notable point here is that AR as a feature continues to take the lead for the second year in a row. And this consists of AR features in non-AR apps, which includes the most popular forms of AR so far, such as Snapchat lenses and Pokemon Go. And this stands to reason because it lets AR sort of piggyback on established apps. But that said, it's also notable that AR Core is following closely behind in second place, followed by ARKit apps and Web AR, which will be the format we believe to watch, and one that could really grow the most in future waves based on the trend analysis we're doing here and elsewhere. Now, drilling down one level, what types of AR app categories and content are resonating most? So gaming continues to lead the pack for the third year in a row, followed by social AR experiences, and then product visualization and visual search. Now, a few things jump out here worth noting. One is that gaming's lead isn't surprising due to Pokemon Go, but we're still a bit surprised that social isn't higher due to the prevalence of social lenses, but this is what users are telling us. Another notable point here is the growth in visual search and product visualization, which have both spiked over the last year, which you can see here. And this is really congruent with an ongoing theory we have that AR will move into more utilitarian and even mundane daily use cases as the technology itself matures. And even though gaming and social will continue to be big categories. Things like visual search to identify and contextualize items you encounter on a daily basis, especially commercial items like products, will be more valuable and we believe frequent activities that are starting to bear out here a little bit in this trending. But that's something we're going to continue to look at in future waves. Now, speaking of frequency, survey respondents are reporting pretty favorable usage levels if you consider that 71% are active at least monthly and 46% at least weekly, as shown here. Now, the bad news is that those user volumes are actually down for the most frequent intervals, as there are slight kind of dips from last year in daily and weekly use. So that's going to be something we're going to have to keep watching. But I think what's even more interesting is to cross-reference some of the variables we've examined so far in the last few slides. So if we look at those same frequency categories and then look elsewhere in the survey to how those groupings of respondents separately answer the types of AR experiences they're using, some deeper insights start to emerge. So we see gaming, for example, used heavily among each frequency grouping here. Social also performs well among the most frequent users, which isn't surprising given that social lenses are attached to communications, which is inherently a high frequency activity. And this aligns with some of the high frequency stats that Snapchat has separately reported to us. And this all has some strategic implications about what are the types of use cases to attach AR to. And communications is one of those that's proven to be a good fit, both qualitatively, it just kind of fits natively, but also it has that inherent high frequency usage. And the same goes for visual search, as things like information retrieval, just like web search, is proven to be a high frequency use case. That's just a basic human need. And that's borne out here, as you can see, in that 41% of the highest frequency users all the way to the left report using visual search. So moving on, how much are users willing to pay for mobile AR experiences? So the sweet spot seems to be in the $1 to $3 range, but the price point we're actually most bullish on is free to play with in-app purchases. So Pokemon Go, as you all know, has already kind of validated this revenue model with more than $3 billion in lifetime revenues to date. And this builds on the established revenue model in mobile gaming, and people are already kind of comfortable with it. And here, as you can see, 20% of users reported that it's their preferred payment amount, and that number is even higher for non-users, which we'll go over in just a bit. But I think when you look at that kind of even distribution of price points here, it's sort of indicative of the fact that there's a high satisfaction level among AR users, which kind of gets to the next point, which is, what are those satisfaction levels? What are they reporting here? 68% of respondents are either satisfied or very satisfied with the AR experiences they've tried. And there are few consumer products out there with such high satisfaction, which is of course good news for AR. But I also bring this up here because it contrasts non-user sentiments, which we'll go over in a bit. And that difference, I think, raises some important points. So lastly, in terms of mobile AR users, before we move on to the non-user responses, what do they want to see next? So gaming continues to be in the lead. Then there's a long tail of evenly distributed affinity areas like education and social and city guides and remote tech support and several others you see here. But there are two things I want to underscore here. One is the dip in gaming interest, and the other is the spike in interest for in-store retail assistance. And both of these points, I think, follow the thesis we mentioned earlier, that AR, as it matures and reaches broader audiences, gaming's early lead could give way to some of these other areas that represent daily utility. So that includes being able to summon product information from within store aisles by simply pointing your phone at a product, which is sort of an offshoot of visual search done within a store aisle. But what I think is powerful here is that not only are some of these use cases like in-store retail enablement becoming more and more popular, but they're also inherently monetizable, either directly or through retailer marketing efforts to get and keep customers. And I think a lot of this is fairly moot right now, given global lockdowns, But I think something to keep in mind and consider as things slowly kind of reopen. It's often forgotten that 90% of US retail spending in normal times still happens in brick and mortar physical stores. So that could be really fertile ground for some of these AR shopping use cases. Now, moving on to non-users, the first question we asked in this survey is, do you or have you used mobile AR? So for those that answered yes, we asked them several of the questions we just went over and a lot of other questions. For those who say no, we actually asked them a similar but different set of questions. And we believe that their opinions and answers there are important because they could represent AR's future users as the technology evolves, and they can provide insights about why they are or aren't interested in our AR. In this case, why they're not. So starting at the top, it's clear that AR still represents the minority use case among consumers. And I think we all know that. And as I mentioned earlier, this survey indicates that 26% of US adults use mobile AR, meaning that 74% of respondents reported never having used mobile AR. So looking forward, we asked those non-users about their likelihood of adoption, at least at the current moment. So 59% collectively reported either unlikely or extreme unlikeliness to adopt, which is obviously, something that indicates the industry has its work cut out for it. But the question, I think, that goes a little bit deeper and flows logically from that is why not? So we asked them that, and there we see a sort of resounding answer that's dominated all three survey waves to date, which is the rather deflating sentiment that they're simply just not interested. And that's followed by sentiments that represent some ambivalence or confusion, like I wouldn't even know where to look. So I think a few things jump out here. One is that AR has high satisfaction levels for users, as we went over before, but that contrasts this non-user disinterest. And I think that reflects a key challenge for AR, which really boils down to a sort of a marketing challenge. So in other words, users love it, but non-users don't care. And you can't really capture the immersive experience in traditional marketing or video. So you have to get those non-users to try it in order to fall in love with it, but yet they aren't driven to do so. So it's just one big chicken and egg dilemma. So we could see that alleviate over time as AR sort of acclimates through social viral growth or some of the more utility and value-driven use cases I mentioned earlier, like visual search or in-store shopping. But in the meantime, it'll be all about education and marketing. And I think there, we should consider taking a page from the most popular flavors of mobile AR so far, such as Snapchat lenses and Pokemon Go, and they apply AR as a feature, as we went over earlier. But I think more importantly here, they don't call it AR. I think that's a key point. That's more of a kind of industry term at this stage that we all use, but consumer marketing and appeasement should be more plain spoken. Snapchat, for example, calls it lenses. Google calls visual search what you see. And they stay away from these kind of tech-sounding acronyms. So those are just a few quick takeaways to kind of deal with this challenge of bringing more people into the tent. So lastly, we have price sensitivity, just like we went over for users. And this is notable not just on its own, but in contrast to those user sentiments we went over earlier. So if you remember, 20% of users favored in-app purchases, and then there was an even distribution of sentiments towards other price points, which were led by that $1 to $3 sweet spot. But for non-users, as you can see here, the story is different. So first, to get the bad news out of the way, 42% wouldn't pay any amount, which is expected, given that, again, 39% of non-users are extremely unlikely to adopt, as we just went over. But the silver lining here is that 30% who are interested in in-app purchases. And as I mentioned earlier, in-app purchases have some appeal in that it's an easy sell to ease someone into an experience with no paywall, especially given that non-user ambivalence. And this goes back to that same chicken and egg challenge. Users are highly satisfied with AR, but only after they've tried it. So, free to play experiences with in-app purchases later is sort of aligned with that need to bring first-time users in to get them hooked without raising additional barriers. So closing down here, what did we learn? So I went over most of these points throughout the discussion, but to kind of synthesize them here all in one place. Firstly, AR as a feature is the most prevalent form of AR, and that stands to reason because it gives AR a delivery system that really piggybacks on already well-traveled apps and reduces what we call activation energy. For the same reasons, web AR will be a format to watch. It carries a lot of that same kind of benefits of frictionless activation, through just a web link. And quality of experience is an important point that continues to improve to actually challenge that of native apps. And I think that's just going to continue. Next, in-app purchases are really the prevailing pricing model, given users' existing comfort from mobile games, as we just went over, and also not to raise those additional barriers and front-end friction. And Pokemon Go has validated this with 3 billion in-app purchases to date. Speaking of which, gaming has led the way with AR, but as it matures, again, we believe that killer apps will germinate from utilities like visual search and high-frequency use cases, and these could provide more value and appeal to broader mainstream audiences as the pie grows. We're also bullish on retail assistance to empower shoppers with overlays that provide things like pricing transparency and other in-aisle utilities. And these are the types of use cases that are, again, inherently monetizable. Social continues to be a strong propellant for AR in terms of giving it that extra push of shareability and virality that builds on the network effect of social graphs. So consider whenever possible, making AR experiences social and shareable. And then lastly, to get over that hump of those, ambivalent late adopters, work on AR's marketing, make it plain spoken like Snapchat and Pokemon Go and Google have all done, and consider not even using the term AR. So for AR to thrive, it first must die, or at least the term AR in mainstream user-facing ways. So that's it. I want to thank you all for listening, and I'll reiterate that this just scratches the surface of our survey results, and there's a lot more where that came from, so feel free to contact us with questions. We love geeking out with this stuff. And in that spirit, we'll now take your questions.
Hi. Well, what a great presentation. Thank you so much for that great data. So we have time for just one question from our audience, and we've gotten a lot of really good questions. So thanks, everybody. Keep it up. But Joseph Ellsworth wants to know more about the sample size. He missed that at the beginning. So could you just reiterate for everyone a little bit about the sample size and sources for the survey?
Sure. And first, hi, Lisa, and thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Yes, sample size. So this, as I mentioned, is the third wave of this survey. This wave had a sample size of over 1,000 US online adults. In total, the sample size of all three waves in total, which is important because we did lots of, trending longitudinal analysis wave over wave. The total is over 6,000. Now, the methodology is simply we worked with our data partner, Thrive Analytics, which is a company that has worked for years and years and years with a lot of experience in the best practices of survey science, getting demographically diverse samples and all that good stuff. I mean, there's a wide variance in when you say surveys, when you see surveys. A survey can be something where you did an informal poll on Twitter, right? And that's great, but I mean, actual real kind of survey science involves a lot of rigor around, making sure it's demographically diverse. They have massive consumer sample sizes across the US population, demographics, psychographics, in order to get that really diverse kind of data set.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. And could you just remind folks how they can get in touch with you to follow up if there are a lot of other questions here. I'm sure people would like to reach out when there's more time.
Sure. You can just Google artillery intelligence. You'll find us easily, and we have contact forms, but more easily, if you want to get me, you can DM me on Twitter at AR Insider. Mike at artillery.co is also one way. And I'd love to hear from everyone.